Hi, and welcome to Series 3 of the Australia Academy Dern History Revision podcast. This series is going to focus on early Elizabethan England. As always, this will be a collection of around 5 to 8 minutes of podcast focusing on different aspects of the Elizabethan course. It's not meant to replace your regular revision sessions. What it's here to do is to fill in those little gaps on the way to school, before your tea's ready, little things like that. Don't forget, if you find this useful, we do have a Series 1 and Series 2. Series 1 focuses on medicine and the Western Front, and Series 2 focuses on Weimar and Nazi Germany. There will be a Cold War episodes coming soon once I've finished the Elizabeth session. Okay, let's get started. Hi, and welcome to Series 3 of the Australia Academy Dern History Revision podcast. This series is going to focus on early Elizabethan England. As always, this will be a collection of around 5 to 8 minutes of podcast focusing on different aspects of the Elizabethan course. It's not meant to replace your regular revision sessions. What it's here to do is to fill in those little gaps on the way to school, before your tea's ready, little things like that. Don't forget, if you find this useful, we do have a Series 1 and Series 2. Series 1 focuses on medicine and the Western Front, and Series 2 focuses on Weimar and Nazi Germany. There will be a Cold War episodes coming soon once I've finished the Elizabeth session. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so this is episode 5, and this is going to focus on the issues in Elizabethan society. It's not the most exciting topic, I'm going to be brutally honest with you. I could maybe split this into 2, but I'm going to try and get it through in just 1. I'm not going to go into massive detail with things like this. This is obviously your revision to go alongside listening to this, but hopefully give you a bit of an idea of the kind of things that are going on. So I've got 4 things I'm going to focus on in this episode. I'm going to look at the government acts, the things that Elizabeth government passed that had an impact on society. We're going to look at why there were just so many poor people at this time. We'll look at the leisure activities that different people got involved in, and then we'll look at education and the difference in education from different people. So we'll start off with the government acts. First big government act that we're going to look at is the 1563 Statute of Artificers Act. This was to ensure that poor people got the help that they needed. Okay, so there was a poor rate that people had to pay a tax that would then go to the poor people who didn't have a job, that were struggling to survive. This was a bit wishy-washy in the first few years. You know, some people paid it, some people didn't. So in 1563, they passed a new law that said if you refuse to pay your poor rates, then you will go to prison. As simple as that. Now, the people that are collecting this are the Justice of the Peace. Now, you may get the issue where Justice of the Peace have a few friends who maybe sort of tried to come up with a bit of a deal with their mate to say, look, do I really have to pay it this month? Can you let me off? And people would generally do that. So they also, part of this act was that if you failed to collect the poor rates from anyone within your town, the Justice of Peace would have to pay £20 for every time they didn't collect. Now, £20 back then doesn't sound like a lot of money now, but £20 back then is about the equivalent of £4,500 today. Now, no Justice of the Peace is really going to be able to afford that, and so they would now have to force their friends to pay their poor rates. The second big act that was passed was 9 years later in 1572, and this was the Vagabonds Act. So there was a lot of people, a lot of beggars, a lot of vagabonds hanging around the streets, and the government wanted to try and clear this up. Okay, so if you were caught begging, your first offence, you would be whipped, and a hole would be drilled into your ear, or maybe even the top part of your ear would be cut off. If you were caught again, you were put in prison, and if you were caught a third time, you'd be executed by being hung in the middle of the town. The Justice of the Peace were also told they had to keep a register of anyone who'd been caught, anyone who they thought was a possible person that was that poor. They may turn to this, so they could keep an eye on this. Anybody who was what we call an able-bodied vagabond, so somebody who is begging simply because they're lazy and they can't be bothered to try and get a job, not because they are disabled or impaired in some sort of way, they were told they had to find a job. They couldn't just rely on being a beggar. And it was the town's responsibility to get them into employment. So this wasn't an authority thing. This was everybody in the town had to come together and sort of police themselves, if you like. Final act that was passed was 4 years after this, and this was the Poor Relief Act of 1576. This was a way of trying to help vagabonds out of the situation, rather than just giving them money or tell them go get a job. The Justice of the Peace had to provide the able-bodied vagabonds with materials, something that they could do, something they could manufacture, something they could make, so that they could maybe sell and try and make a business out of it. If you refuse to do this, then you're sent to a house of correction, a prison that's not particularly nice, and it'd be beaten out of you, if you like. So, why is there so many poor people? Why are so many people turning to vagabondage and begging to get by at this time? Well, there's 4 reasons, really. The first one is just down to sheer number of people that we have in England at this time. There is a massive population growth during Elizabethan England. 35% increase in the number of people in England at this time. London, for example, grows 10 times bigger than Norwich. Now, Norwich was the second city at this time, and London is now 10 times the size of it. So many people now living in London. Because of this high population, and due to the fact that there were several poor harvests at this time due to bad weather, prices start to go up. Those of you who do business studies will know that if there's not as much food and there's too many people, the demand becomes higher and therefore the prices go up. Okay. Now, the way poverty is measured is that if 80% of your income is spent on keeping you alive, so buying essential foods, then you are considered to be poor. Well, if the prices are going up, but the wages are not going up with it, then obviously more of your money is going to be spent on essentials, and therefore you're going to be classed as that in that poor bracket. Final 2 reasons are down to farming. Okay, so we start to see a massive increase in sheep farming at this time. Sheep farming is a very simplistic way of earning a living. Sheep will pretty much look after themselves. Stick them in a field, they'll eat grass, they won't do anything. So you don't need as many people to look after them as if you had maybe cows or something like that, or chickens. So if you've got sheep, you don't need to employ as many people on your farm, which therefore increases the amount of unemployment. Okay, in fact, it gets so big, sheep farm this time, that 81.6% of all English exports at this time was wool. So sheep farming is massive, massive business. The final reason why there's so many poor is you get something what we call enclosure farming. Okay, so people can no longer just take a bit of land and start growing what they want. Land starts to get fenced off. It starts to be taken over by these huge landowners. So if you had a small patch of land that you were growing food on, or you maybe had a couple of animals, the chances are you're going to lose that land, because that land will be enclosed by a larger farmer who's got more wealth, who's able to take over. So you start to see the emergence of the big farms, and the smaller farms start to go out of business. So what do people do at this time for leisure, for entertainment? Okay, again, depends on your wealth. If you're in the nobility, then you're looking at things such as hunting, mainly on horseback, so fox hunting and things like that. You're looking at hawking, okay, so training hawks in the air. Fishing was quite popular, fencing, and something called real tennis. Now, real tennis is not the same tennis we have today. It's a mixture of tennis and squash. So you are playing tennis, but you're enclosed in an arena where the ball can bounce off the side walls and the back walls as well. If you are working class, your main sport would be football. It's not the same as we have today, guys. It's not the same sort of football. There is a ball, there are 2 goals, and that's about it. For that, anything goes. Okay, this is a chance for you to get back at that neighbour that you don't like. It is a very, very violent sport. People die playing this version of football. The other 2 big things are animal cruelty sports, okay, what we call blood sports. So you've got baiting, whether that's bear baiting, bull baiting, where people will set dogs on older but larger animals and bet whether the dogs will survive, which dog will make the kill. And then the most popular blood sport at this time is something called cockfighting, putting 2 cockerels against each other, and they fight to the death. You own a cockerel, then obviously you can make quite a lot of money from this. If you don't own a cockerel, you can go along and watch and place bets on who you think is going to win the fight. The final 2 sort of pastimes that are enjoyed at this time, first of all, we've got literature. Okay, so we see big increase in books and plays and poetry being written, a lot of history being written at this time. This is the time towards the end of Elizabethan England where we start to see Shakespeare and things like that sort of really emerge. And then leading on to that, we've got the theatre. Anybody can go to the theatre, anybody can enjoy the theatre. If you're rich, you'll get a seat. If you're poor, you've got to stand. It doesn't cost as much, obviously, to stand, and if it rains, there's no roof, so you are going to get wet, you're going to be stood in the mud, but you still get to enjoy the theatre. Okay, so it was a real leveller, if you like, going to the theatre. And then the final thing I'm going to talk about is education. And again, education would denote, first of all, if you were rich or poor, but also if you were male or female. So if you were part of the nobility, okay, the ruling classes, then you wouldn't go to school. Boys and girls were taught, but they were taught in-house. So they were taught by their parents, friends. And what you would generally have is that each family or each adult would have their own specialty. So if I'm nobility and my specialty is history, then I will teach the children history. Okay, and they will come to me once a week and I will teach them history. They will then go to Mr. Rogers down the road and he will teach them about maths or something like that. So that you would learn from the specialism within your own little circle. If you were well off, middle class, maybe you had a little bit of money, you might send your child to a grammar school. You'd have to pay to go to it, but the grammar school would only accept your child, had to be male, if they were talented. Okay, if they were supremely talented, they might get a scholarship and they might be able to go for free. But if your child had a little bit about them, a little bit of intelligence, then you could send them to a grammar school. If you were a boy, then before grammar school, you would go to something called a petty school. Okay, so this was taught in the teacher's home, and this would teach them discipline. It would teach them what it's like to go to school. It's a little bit like a primary school. You learn the basic rules, you learn what you're going to have to do, and like I say, that's done in the teacher's home. If you're female, you got something similar to a petty school, and these are called dame schools. These would focus, again, similar sort of thing, but they wouldn't focus on the same sort of education. So you're not going to be learning maths and things like that. You're going to be learning things that girls will need to know in order to be successful females in later life. So you're going to have to learn how to cook, how to clean, how to sew, how to raise a child, how to raise a family. It's very sexist, but we are talking about the 1500s. Things will obviously be very, very different then. So that's society in a nutshell. I've gone quite quickly on there. I'm looking around 10 minutes. I probably should have split this into two, but I think you've got the basics of what you need. Okay, so if you haven't done so already, check out the previous 5 episodes that are on there. There are 2 episode 3s, which is why it's 5 episodes, not 4. And also make sure you check out the medicine and the German ones as well. And just keep an eye out for the Cold War. They will be dropping once I've done episode 6 on Elizabeth. I will start the Cold War ones very, very soon. Keep revising, guys. Keep working hard. It all pays off in the end. Good luck. See you all later.